I caught my wife cheating on me, and at that moment, my life turned upside down. Now, I am completely lost and don't know what to do next. To be honest, there were some signs, but I ignored them. I was blinded by love and couldn't even imagine that something like this could happen to me, and especially with her, my wife and best friend for almost 20 years. I work in another city and wasn't supposed to come home until tonight. The next day, we were going to go on a short 2-day trip. We wanted to spend some time together after a very busy summer with family and friends, but everything was quiet at work, so I decided to come home early, in the afternoon. I thought it would be a nice surprise for her. However, when I drove up to the house, I immediately noticed something strange. There was a truck in the yard that I didn't recognize, and at that moment, I remembered a conversation with a neighbor that had taken place a few days earlier. He had asked me how I liked my new truck. I thought he had simply made a mistake and didn't think much of it. But when I saw this vehicle near my house, I was overcome by a strange and disturbing premonition. I loved my wife and trusted her completely, but this feeling wouldn't leave me alone. I quietly walked over to our bedroom window. The window was slightly open, and then I heard voices. My heart began to beat faster. I moved closer and looked through the window. At that moment, my worst fears were confirmed. They were there, in our bedroom, in a very intimate and unambiguous situation. I just left. At that moment, it was very difficult for me to control myself. I knew that if I gave in to my emotions, I might do something I would later regret. Right now, it's hard for me to even think about what will happen next. I went to our family cottage outside the city. I hardly slept that night trying to come to terms with what had happened. This morning, I was even going to go back home to talk to her and sort everything out. But at the last moment, I realized that I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. All I feel right now is intense anger and pain. And I understand that in this state, it's better not to make any decisions. So I came back to the cottage again. During this time, she has called and texted me many times. Her friends and relatives also tried to contact me. Everyone had something to say. Some asked me to give her a chance. Others tried to explain her behavior. But there was one person whose message stuck with me the most. It was her father. He wrote me a very short message. He said I should do what was best for me. He added that no matter what happened next, he would always treat me like a son. When I read those words, for the first time in all this time, I couldn't hold back my tears. Tomorrow I have an appointment with Sharon, my psychotherapist. And on Thursday, I have a meeting with my lawyer. I think I understand where this is all leading. But until that step is taken, I'm still trying to sort out my thoughts and figure out what the next stage of my life will be. She added, "I'm going to confess everything to my husband right now, and I thought you deserved to know the truth too." After saying this, she fell silent. There was silence on the other end of the line. She was silent for about a minute. Then she said in a cold voice, "If this is some kind of cruel joke, I will find out who you are." After saying that, she simply hung up. Less than 10 minutes later, my wife received a text message. The contact was listed as Karen from work. The message read, "Thank you. You just ruined my life." I picked up the phone and replied myself, "No. You destroyed 4 lives and 2 marriages. Don't forget that it all started because of your decisions." For the next hour, my wife begged me to stay. She asked for another chance. She suggested we go to family therapy together. She said she would do anything to regain my trust. She even said she was ready to completely change her life if only I would stay. In many ways, I had already expected such words. I had read advice from people who had been through similar situations. Then she suggested another idea. She said we should go on the vacation we had planned. "I'll pay for everything," she said. "We need time to be together." She explained that my work schedule had driven us apart and that we needed to spend time together to discuss everything. But she didn't expect my answer. I calmly told her that I had already been to that very place. She looked confused. Then I said something else. I explained that I had already started working with a psychologist to figure out everything that had happened. And finally, I said something she definitely didn't expect to hear. I told her that I had seen everything with my own eyes, that I had come home early that evening and saw her with that man in our house. She froze. It seemed she had no idea that I knew about it. I also told her that I already had a place where I could live temporarily. When she heard all this, she seemed to collapse. She sank to the floor and began to cry. Through her tears, she kept saying that she had made a terrible mistake and ruined everything, and that now she didn't know how to live with it. She was completely broken. Through her tears, she said that she had made a terrible mistake and ruined everything. At one point, she started saying that she didn't deserve my forgiveness or a normal life after what she had done. I tried to stay calm, but it was hard to see her in that state. This went on for quite a long time. I spent almost 4 hours there. All this time, she tried to explain her actions, asked me to stay, said she was ready to do anything to fix things. She tried to hug me, convinced me to give her another chance and try to figure everything out together. But at that moment, I didn't know how I felt anymore. In the end, I decided to do one thing. I called her friend Karen. I told her that her friend was in a very difficult emotional state and that she should come and be with her. After that, I just left. Almost a month has passed since then. We haven't spoken since. I replied, "If you think you would want to know the truth, put yourself in her shoes." She dialed the number, but no one answered. A few minutes later, her phone rang. The screen read, "Karen from work." But her reaction immediately showed that it wasn't Karen at all. She looked confused. I asked, "Is it him?" She nodded. I took the phone and answered. The man on the other end said, "Sorry, I think I dialed the wrong number." I calmly replied, "No, you have the right number. I am the husband of the woman you were seeing." After a short pause, I added, "I'll pass the phone to her now. She has something she needs to tell you." I handed the phone to my wife. She spoke with him for a few minutes. When the conversation ended, she said, "I told him everything. He knows the truth." And she added quietly, "It's over between us." She told him on the phone, "It was a mistake. It was just a brief infatuation. And don't ever contact me again." I asked her for the phone before she could finish the conversation. When he was back on the line, I asked him a direct question. "Tell me, which divorce lawyer are you going to hire?" He was taken aback. "Divorce?" he asked. I replied, "Didn't you tell my wife you were getting a divorce?" He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "No." Then I said, "In that case, I think I need to talk to your wife. She has as much right to know the truth as I do." He immediately became nervous. "Please, I didn't know she was married. Don't ruin my marriage because of one mistake." I calmly replied, "You ruined my marriage with the same mistake." After a pause, I added, "It's only fair that your wife knows the truth too." He started begging me not to do it. He said his wife was at work and promised he would tell her everything himself when she got home. He swore he would do it. I replied, "Okay." "Then do it," and I ended the conversation. After that, I asked my wife if she knew his wife's name and where she worked. She said she did. I asked her to call there. She managed to get through. When the woman picked up the phone, my wife asked her to sit down first, but she said she was just finishing her workday and was about to leave. She suggested calling back in a few minutes from her car, and indeed, she called back shortly thereafter. When she was back on the line, she asked, "What's going on?" My wife said calmly, "I have to tell you something very unpleasant, and I don't want you to hear it while you're driving. Please pull over first." The woman immediately became frightened and asked, "Oh my God, has something happened to my husband?" My wife quickly replied, "No, he's fine. He's at home." After a short pause, she said, "I just want you to know the truth. "Your husband and I have been having an affair for the past month." I replied, "Yes, I want to know the truth." She confessed that they had been intimate that evening, but that wasn't the end of it. At that moment, I told her, "I don't want to hear the story in bits and pieces anymore. Either you tell me everything now, or this will be our last conversation." She started crying again. It took a few minutes before she could continue. Finally, she confessed. We met several more times. She said she was very sorry. She kept saying that she loved me and was ready to do anything to make things right. At first, she claimed that it had only happened once, but then she told the truth. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was an affair. According to her, they continued to meet when I was away on business. It went on for almost a month. After that, she added another detail. This man is also married, and according to him, he was going to get a divorce. I asked, "Does he know you're married?" She replied quietly, "Yes." He knows. I asked her, "If he's cheating because his marriage is falling apart, according to him, does that mean you also think our marriage is ending?" "Did you tell him that?" She replied quickly, "No, I don't think our marriage is over." Then she started crying again. I was stupid. I hate myself for it. Please don't leave me. I'll do anything you say to make it right. I looked at her and asked another question. If you were in my place, or in his wife's place, what would you want in this situation? She thought for a moment and said, I would want to know the truth, and I would want to feel that I could trust again. I replied, then start with that. She said, you can trust me. I messed up, but it won't happen again. I asked, if you were his wife, would you want to know the truth? She replied quietly, yes. Then I said, then fix it. She looked at me and asked, do you want me to call her? It was a pre-planned girls' night out. According to her, 4 friends were going to spend the night together, watching movies, chatting, and relaxing. At least, that's what she told me at the time. Later, around 1 in the morning, she called me to say goodnight. We talked for about 20 minutes. During the conversation, she repeated several times how well their evening was going. But at some point, I heard a man's voice in the background. And then I asked, who is that? At first, she said she couldn't hear anything. But after a few seconds, the man's voice sounded again, this time much louder. Then she couldn't deny it anymore. She said, oh, yes, one of the girls brought a couple of guys with her. To be honest, most people didn't like it very much. She was a little drunk and was almost 3 hours away from me. At that moment, I had no choice but to believe her. But we still ended up arguing again. What hurt me the most was that she didn't tell me the truth right away. She promised then that she would never put herself in a situation like that again. Now I realize that promise was probably not sincere. As I sat in the park and thought about all these events and our conversations, I decided to give her one more chance to tell me the truth. I turned on my phone. Almost immediately it rang. It was her. I answered. She cried and almost screamed into the phone, begging me to come home. After a while, I finally went home. When I entered the house, she immediately rushed towards me. She was crying heavily. We sat down on the sofa, and she repeated over and over again, forgive me. Please forgive me. I looked at her and asked, what exactly are you apologizing for? She began to rock nervously back and forth. It took her a few minutes to calm down and catch her breath. Only then did she finally begin to speak. She finally said, I lied about that man who supposedly tried to kiss me. I replied calmly, okay. Then tell me what really happened. She paused and said, that night we did go to his house, all of us together. She added that at first it seemed like normal conversation and joking around, but from her tone, it was clear that it was much more serious than that. When I heard this, I felt sick. My head was spinning. It felt like the room was closing in on me and my thoughts were becoming confused. It seemed like I was having a real panic attack. I went to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and washed my face with cold water, trying to calm down a little. When I came back, I asked her directly, "What happened between you two?" She hesitated and asked, "Do you really want to hear this? Can I see your phone?" She immediately agreed and handed it to me. I checked the messages. The phone looked completely clean. There were only messages from me and her mother. Then she admitted that she hadn't actually gone to yoga class. The conversation went something like this. I asked, "If you weren't at yoga, then where were you?" She replied that she was just walking around to calm down a bit. She said that she had been very nervous lately and wanted to distract herself a little. She almost never deletes her messages. So what I saw seemed rather strange to me. I checked her photos. Everything looked completely normal there too. But then I decided to look at the folder with deleted photos. And there I found a photo of a man I had never seen before. I showed her the photo and asked, "Who is this?" She replied, "It's the guy who tried to kiss me." I looked at her and asked, "Then why did you take his photo?" She replied briefly, "It was just stupid." But that explanation wasn't enough for me. I asked again, "That doesn't explain why you have his photo. Why did you take it?" She just shrugged and said she didn't know. Then I asked another question. "Is that all you want to tell me? Or is there something else?" She replied, "That's all I can remember." After that, I decided to leave again. I didn't want to continue a conversation in which the truth was revealed gradually and in bits and pieces. I got into my pickup truck and drove away. She ran out into the street, trying to stop me, but I was already gone. I drove to the nearest park. There I stopped, sat down on the back of the pickup truck, took out my lunch, and tried to calmly think about what to do next. As I sat there, various memories began to surface in my mind. Situations that I should perhaps have paid attention to earlier. For example, once I was working on my day off and went to bed quite early. That evening, my wife went to a club with some friends. One night, I woke up around 4 in the morning. I looked at the clock and realized she wasn't home yet. I called her several times, but she didn't answer. About half an hour later, she finally called back and asked me to come pick her up. When I picked her up, she explained what had happened. According to her, she and her friends tried to call a taxi, but they were unsuccessful. Then 2 men, acquaintances of her friend, offered to give them a ride. But first they wanted to stop by their house. When they arrived, her friend, who was also married, went into a room with one of the men. My wife said that at first she tried to find her friend in the house, but after a while she stopped looking and just stayed in the kitchen, where she sat and talked with the men's neighbors while she waited. She also claimed that she didn't hear my phone when I tried to call her. Because of this, we had a serious conversation. She even said that she was upset by her friend's behavior and decided to stop communicating with her. At that moment, I thought that this story was over and no longer mattered. But later, I remembered another incident. Once she went to visit a friend in another city. I was surprised. "So, you sometimes go out drinking alone now?" She shrugged and said quietly, "Maybe I'm going through a difficult period right now. Maybe we'll talk about it later." I looked at her and said calmly, "This is your last chance to tell the truth. If you're not honest now, I'll just leave." She fell silent again, and after a pause, she said, "I really don't know what else to tell you." I said, "Okay, then I'm leaving." After saying that, I got up and left the house. Usually, when we argued, I would just get in the car and drive around for a while to be alone and calm down. Most likely, she thought at first that it would be the same this time. But soon she realized that this time it was different. I took my clothes, some personal belongings, and even my game console with me. Then she started calling me. I answered once and told her that I had given her a chance to be honest with me. But she didn't take it. So, in my opinion, we had nothing left to talk about. She started begging me to come home and discuss everything calmly. She said she didn't understand why I was so upset, and what exactly she had done wrong in my opinion. She kept repeating that she loved me and would never want to hurt me. But even hearing those words was very difficult. Before, I always believed them without question. They always calmed me down. Now, everything felt completely different. Every word she said only intensified the pain. I realized that I couldn't continue this conversation any longer. So I just ended the call. But she didn't stop. After that, she called me again and again. I think the phone rang almost 40 times. Before I was ready to answer the call again, she called again. This time she asked, "Did you talk to Karen?" Karen is her best friend. I asked why she was asking that question. She replied, "Please come home. I don't want to discuss this on the phone." I agreed. I drove around town a little longer to calm down and collect my thoughts, then drove home. When we started talking, the conversation went something like this. She asked, "So, did you talk to Karen?" I replied, "No." Then she began to explain. According to her, a few weeks ago, when I was at work, she and Karen went to a bar. Two men approached them and started buying them drinks. They chatted a little, nothing serious. But when they were about to leave, one of the men tried to kiss her. She said she immediately pulled away and told him she was married. According to her, this situation upset her greatly. She even wanted to tell me about it, but then decided not to bring it up. She went on to say that Karen started talking to one of the men that evening. Later, without her consent, she gave her phone number to his friend. She claimed that the man texted her several times, but she never replied to the messages. After that, I asked. Then, I drove to the man's house. My wife's car wasn't there, but his truck was parked in its usual spot. I decided to text her and ask where she was. She replied that she was at the store buying groceries. To be honest, I trust her so little now that I even drove past the store to make sure she was really there. I hate to admit it, but my trust in her has been severely shaken. And right now, this is the only way I can be sure of anything. After that, I texted her again. I asked her to just come home because we needed to have a serious talk. She replied briefly, "What's wrong?" I simply told her that we needed to have a serious and honest talk, and then turned off my phone. About 15 minutes later, she came home. When she came in, she approached me as she always did, wanting to hug and kiss me, but I carefully moved away. She looked at me and asked again what was going on. Then I calmly said that she needed to start talking to me honestly. She pretended not to understand what I was talking about. She said she didn't know what I meant. I replied, "Okay, if you can't be honest with me now, then maybe I'd better leave." At that moment, she became visibly nervous, and suddenly she said, "Are you talking about yoga?" I immediately realized that the conversation was moving in the right direction. I asked what exactly she meant. I asked her, "Why were you so nervous? And why did you decide to lie to me about what you were doing?" She replied that she was very stressed about preparing for the move and simply didn't know how to talk to me about it. I asked again, "So you decided to lie? Why didn't you just say you were going out for a walk to relieve stress?" She said she didn't want to deceive me. According to her, she was afraid that her worries would only add to my stress. I replied, "But I wasn't stressed at all, and I feel like you're still not telling me the whole truth." She looked at me in surprise and asked, "What do you mean?" I said bluntly, "I think you're lying about more than just yoga classes. If we want to continue this conversation, you need to be honest." She was silent for a while. Then she said, "I don't know what else to say." So I asked another question. "What about last weekend? You said you were with friends and came back late. Was that really the case?" She hesitated a little and replied, "I did go out for a drink that evening, but I didn't meet up with the friend I told you about." I asked, "Then who were you with?" She replied, "No one. I was just by myself. I don't think I'll ever be able to trust her again the way I used to. If someone can talk about love so easily while being with someone else, it's hard for me to imagine that our relationship has a future." Nevertheless, I decided not to make any hasty decisions. I understood that it was important to remain calm and clear-headed at that moment. It was then that Jen said that Sharon was coming over for dinner that evening. Sharon is a counselor that Jen found for me. To clarify, she had never met my wife before. It was my first meeting with her as well. Sharon turned out to be a very pleasant person, and we hit it off pretty quickly. After dinner, she and I decided to take a short walk around my brother's neighborhood. We needed to walk the dogs anyway, and it gave us a chance to talk privately. The conversation turned out to be very helpful for me. Sharon listened attentively and asked calm, clear questions. For the first time in several days, I felt like I could speak openly and not feel like I had to be on the defensive all the time. In a way, this conversation was even therapeutic. Although I always find it easy to talk to my brother, this was a little different. And, to be honest, this was exactly the kind of conversation I really needed right now. It helps me to tell you all about it. Sometimes just getting it off my chest is a huge relief. When I describe everything in order, it helps me sort through the chaos of thoughts in my head. Our walk with Sharon lasted about an hour. And, in fact, the main advice she gave me was quite simple. She said I shouldn't put off talking to my wife for too long. According to her, the more time passes, the harder it becomes to start such a conversation. She also pointed out one important thing. Right now, clarity is the most important thing for me. And the only person who can really answer many of my questions is my wife. Later that night, Jen and Matt offered to let me stay with them for as long as I needed. I'm very grateful to them for that. But I know myself and my brother. We both have a limit to our patience when it comes to living together for long periods of time. So I decided to talk to my boss. He was understanding and helped me arrange temporary housing from the company. I had stayed there before, usually once every 2 weeks when I was working in the area. But I always had to go home for the weekends. Now he was able to arrange for me to stay there for several months if necessary. That calmed me down a bit. I also decided to schedule another appointment with Sharon this week. After our walk, I realized that this conversation had been very useful for a first session. She agreed to meet and talk. On Sunday evening, I spent most of my time lying in bed thinking about how to start this conversation. It turned out to be much more difficult than I expected. Even the imaginary scenarios in my head caused me to feel strong emotions. Sometimes anger, sometimes sadness. In the end, I decided not to try to think through every word in advance. I would just improvise. Usually, in difficult situations, I cope better when I act according to the circumstances. The next morning, I said goodbye to Matt and Jen and drove home. On the way, one thought kept running through my mind. What if that man is there when I arrive? But then I realized that if that happened, I might end up in the same state of intense anger I had been in a few days earlier. So at first, I just drove slowly past the house. Neither his truck nor my wife's car was there. I went into the house and gathered some things I didn't want to part with. Mostly photos and a few old family heirlooms. I carefully packed everything into the car. I stayed in the room, and he came back later and brought me some food. He also managed to rent a small boat for the next day. On Saturday morning, we went to the lake to fish. The hotel owner knew about our plans and was very attentive. He even put together a small refrigerator with food and drinks for us. According to him, it was a way to make their romantic package useful for both brothers. It was very nice. Although, to be honest, the fishing itself wasn't very successful. My brother and I caught a few trout, but they were too small, so we had to release them back into the water. Fortunately, the snacks prepared for us at the hotel came in handy. We finished fishing around noon and then decided to drive around the area a bit. We stopped at several wineries and small fruit shops. We bought some food and a few cases of wine for my brother's wife, Jen. In the evening, we went out for dinner. Our goal was to find the biggest tomahawk steak we could find in the area. It was a fitting end to the day. On Sunday morning, we drove back to my brother's house. He lives in a neighboring town about an hour's drive from my house. When we arrived, Jen was already waiting for us. We opened a bottle of cold white wine and sat down to talk. At that moment, my weekend was officially over, and that's when Jen told me something I didn't expect to hear at all. While we were away, she decided to do some surveillance on what was going on near my house. According to her, that man was at my house on Friday night and spent the whole night there, and on Saturday morning, Jen happened to be nearby just as he was leaving the house. She decided to follow him from a distance. That's how she found out where he lived. But that wasn't the end of it. Jen also said that my wife went to see him on Saturday evening, and this was at the same time she was sending me messages saying she missed me and was thinking about me. Jen did spend part of her time with relatives who live in my city, but the rest of the time she just watched what was going on. And one day she accidentally saw my wife leaving that man's apartment. On Sunday morning, Jen took some photos. They showed them saying goodbye and hugging before getting into the car. I immediately said I didn't want to see the photos. It was already clear to me that was the last straw for me. Fortunately, the hotel staff were understanding about the situation. They allowed us to swap the romantic suite for a regular room with 2 separate beds. What's more, there was a beautiful lake near the hotel. You could even rent a boat there and spend time on the water. Perhaps a few days in such a place will help me calm down a little and put my thoughts in order. My brother and I have been talking for a long time about how one day we would have the opportunity to spend a few free weekends together. Now that situation has arisen. For a few days, I don't have to write to my wife or talk to her, and, to be honest, it relieves the tension a little. It gives me time to think things through calmly. At the moment, I am seriously considering divorce. To be honest, I don't see any other way out yet. My brother understands how I feel and supports me, but he suggested taking a break for a couple of weeks first and thinking everything through carefully. He also advised me to talk to a specialist. His wife knows a family counselor who agreed to meet with me on Monday. I'm not sure if it will change my decision, but maybe talking to someone will help me sort through the chaos of thoughts in my head. In addition, I followed the advice of some people in the comments and started consulting with lawyers. For now, it's just to understand what steps need to be taken if it really comes to divorce. I want to approach this as calmly and sensibly as possible. I never thought she was the kind of person who would cheat on me, but in the end, something happened that I didn't expect at all. So now I realize that I have to be prepared for any turn of events. For now, I'm just trying to have a peaceful weekend. Quite a lot has happened over the last few days. I'll start with the less important things. My brother and I drove for almost 5 hours to a hotel surrounded by vineyards. I am very grateful to him for being there for me during this time. We spent most of the trip just talking. It was a frank, heart-to-heart conversation that really helped me clear my head of some heavy thoughts. When we arrived, I wanted to be alone for a while. My brother decided to go out for dinner. An unknown number would call, I would answer, and immediately after that, the call would be disconnected. At first, I didn't think much of it. We often get calls from various services, advertising, telemarketing, or people looking for the previous owner of the number. But usually in such cases, they say at least something. Here, the call just stopped immediately. At that moment, I didn't think much of it. Later, my brother came to visit me. We talked long and seriously about everything that had happened. Although I had always said that my wife was my best friend, in reality, it was my brother who had always been the person I could completely rely on. That conversation reminded me of one important thing. No matter what happens, he will always be there for me, without judgment and without unnecessary questions, just as I have always been there for him. Sometimes we argue, like any brothers, but in difficult moments he always shows what real support is. Since I was supposed to be at work that night, I decided to reply to one of my wife's messages. We are not allowed to use our phones at work, so I can usually only send short messages from time to time. She knows that sometimes I can quickly send a couple of lines. I wrote to her that I needed to go check one of the company's remote sites, and that because of this, I probably wouldn't be able to call her until the end of the weekend. I also wrote that I would sort out all our reservations and plans later. She replied that in that case she could go away for the weekend with her best friend to the romantic hotel near the winery that I had booked. When I read that message, I had a strange feeling. It seemed to me that she meant a completely different friend than the one she wanted me to think of. I calmly replied that I had already transferred the reservation to my brother and his wife. Since the reservation was non-refundable, they agreed to refund me a little later. This morning, I canceled almost all of our reservations. I only kept the hotel room. My brother decided to go there with me. I've been sitting here for over an hour, trying to calm down and get my thoughts in order. Part of me wants to just forget about everything, at least for a while, but another part understands that it's important to keep a clear head right now. I feel like I'm at one of the most difficult moments in my life, and I understand that the decisions I make in the coming days could determine my entire future. Today, I feel much better. The pain is almost gone. Although inside there is still a strange feeling, as if I had been hit hard in the stomach. But overall, I've started to look to the future little by little. It's only been 2 days, so it feels a little strange. Sometimes I think it's just the calm before a new wave of emotions. And sometimes I think that maybe I'm just trying to hold on stronger than I expected. I'm also going to thank my neighbor. He was probably trying to hint at something to me earlier. But I'll do it carefully and unobtrusively, just like he did. Many people asked about the signs I mentioned earlier, but I decided to ignore them at the time. Now, looking back, some things seem pretty obvious. For example, she started texting late at night a lot. This was very unusual for her. She also started meeting up with friends regularly after work. She almost never did that before. At the time, I was even happy about it. I thought she had just become more sociable. In addition, she started taking weekly yoga classes. But later it turned out that she wasn't even paying for the yoga classes. One of the instructors turned out to be her colleague, and in exchange for the classes, she simply helped with the organization and cleaning up after the workouts. At the time, it didn't seem strange to me. Although, to be honest, sometimes it seemed to me that for someone who regularly practiced yoga, she didn't seem particularly flexible. There was another moment that I now remember differently. Sometimes she would receive calls from unknown numbers. We had a simple rule at home. If one of our phones rang and the other person was closer to it, they would simply answer it. A strange situation occurred several times.